We're in John chapter 13. We're going to talk about what we can be thankful for in context of what John tells us in John chapter 13. Let's start reading in verse 1. It says, "It was just before the Passover feast. Jesus knew that the time had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love." Wow. What an introduction. Is it just the introduction to this story that we're going to look at today, or is it an introduction to the whole sacrifice that Jesus made that we're going to celebrate later when we take the Lord's Supper? Both. Have you ever showed somebody the full extent of your love? I mean, they knew Jesus loved them. Now, you probably told them. They knew by the way he treated them that he loved them. But now he's going to show them, he's going to show us the full extent of his love. If you had one chance to show somebody, to tell somebody and say, all right, this is how much I love you, you'd have to let your mind go wild if you're trying to, how would you do that? Well, you can look to see how Jesus did it. Let's see what happens. Very first thing John tells us about, it says the evening meal was being served. And the devil had already prompted Judas Iscariot, son of Simon, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from the Father and was returning to the Father. So, he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with a towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand." "No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." "Then Lord," Simon Peter said, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." Peter. Jesus answered, "A person who has had a bath needs only to wash his feet. His whole body is clean. And you are clean, though not every one of you." For he knew who was going to betray him. And that is why he said, not every one of you was clean. When he'd finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. "Do you understand what I have done for you?" he asked them. "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your teacher and Lord, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. I tell you the truth, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Once you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them." New story, guys. New material. You don't have it in the Synoptic Gospels. Matter of fact, what you have in the Synoptic Gospels is this little argument about who's the greatest. It's one of their favorite arguments to have, right? And Jesus said, "Let the greatest among you be the servant of all." But somehow John's readers, the people he wrote this for, didn't get it. That wasn't enough. John had to tell them this story because they didn't get it just from that little thing about let the greatest among you be the servant of everybody. He said, there's a story about Jesus you need to hear. And here's what happened. We were sitting down for the meal. And in the middle of the meal, not the traditional time to have your feet washed, but nobody had had their feet washed. Somehow that got missed. Jesus got up and did it himself. He washed their feet. And Peter gave him this cool little argument, said, "No, Lord." And he said, "Oh, Peter, he says, you don't understand. Just let me teach you a lesson. And Peter said, no, Lord, you'll never wash my feet. And he said, oh, Peter. And then Peter said, well, let's take it to extremes. Wash my feet, wash my hands, wash my head. And he said, oh, Peter, your feet are dirty. I'm just going to wash your feet. And then he sat back down and he said, do you understand what I just did? John's hearers, the people who received this book from John, needed to understand what Jesus just did. Remember, we've seen these clues that they have this thing about glorifying the Jewish religious leaders and glorifying John the Baptist. That's a thing they have, and John is constantly putting those two groups in their place and saying, no, it's about Jesus. But they want to be like that. They want to be like that kind of hierarchical system that says, here is somebody who's elevated over somebody else. Look, a religious leader. Behold, Peter. Behold, John the Baptist. Aren't they? Shouldn't we just do things for them? Have you ever been in a group that has a clear hierarchical structure? Guess who gets served? The people at the top. Well, they're too important. They're too important to do that for everybody. Hey, Steve, brother, sit down. They're too important to have to take care of those menial things for everybody. So they need somebody else to take care of them. And they're worthy of being served, right? Guess what John's readers were like? Guess what they wanted to be? They wanted to be the people at the top. The people that are served. Jesus says, remember last week he told us, he said, when you reject me, you don't reject me, you reject the Father. He said, let me tell you something about God. Your God is a servant. Your God is a servant. And here's what he wants you to be. A servant. This is what he wants. This is what he's trying. This is remember the introduction? He's now going to show them the full extent of his love. He said, here's what I want you to understand about God. Here's the way I want you to treat each other. Here's what I want you to think of as the person who is the most worthy like God. Do you see how this is a little bit more powerful than just the argument, who's the greatest? That his readers needed, that the apostles needed to have this lesson. Have you ever had anybody wash your feet? I've had it happen once. Yes. Well, no, yeah, I mean, in kind of a formal situation. And it was as a missionary in Nigeria, and I had sandals. And the roads weren't paved, and it was hot. And you know how refreshing it is when somebody washes your feet? When they're hot and they're dirty? It's an amazing thing, right? Now there are religious groups that say, okay, this is what we need to do. Jesus commanded us. We need to wash each other's feet. And so once a year, or maybe twice a year, maybe several times, they have foot washing, and they say, well, this is what God wanted us to do. And you, okay, it's a little weird now, because, we got socks and shoes, and some people you don't want them to take their socks off. Okay? But it's still a very humbling thing. But is Jesus trying to make this a religious ritual? He's not. But we are in danger of doing that, even about this story, aren't we? I mean, this is... If we were to wash each other's feet, we want to know, we should start washing. I don't want to be the last one because the water's kind of dirty. Right? And how many towels are we talking about? And